Hi everybody, my name is Cameron and today we're going to be looking at genetics and in particular evolution. We're going to be looking at the history of genetics and evolution, the evidence of evolution, as well as the classification system. So back in the 19th century, this was before Darwin, there was a man called Gregor Mendel. He is seen as the father of inheritance and the father of genetics. It started with him. He came up with this idea of units being passed down from parent to offspring. He observed this in a pea plant collection that he had, where he would specifically crossbreed certain pea plants with certain characteristics and then analyze the offspring and what traits the offspring would have gotten from these parents. Now, that's about as far as he got. He knew that something was being passed down. He called them units. We know them now as genes. Years later, then we had identified chromosomes, DNA. So Gregor Mendel was before microscopes. So he didn't know exactly what this thing was that was being passed down. But then as technology advanced, then we were able to see these things called chromosomes and these little packages of genes. We then had the Watson Crick and Rosalind Franklin who discovered the structure of DNA, and then we figured out gene theory, and that was that genes are going to encode for proteins, and therefore they're going to have specific traits through these genes in the living organism. Throughout history, there have been many theories about where we came from as humans. One of the theories was brought up by a man called Lamarck. Now, Lamarck believed that animals adapted to their environment, which is true. Now, how these animals adapted was where he went a little astray, let's say. So he believed that all animals were linked to something called the fountain of life, and that everything descended from worms. This was obviously never found, and people back in the day didn't like being compared to worms, let alone being said that humans came from worms. The biggest theory that Lamarck had that was realized to be incorrect was that animals adapted to their environment in their lifetime, and then they passed those adaptations onto their offspring. We know this is incorrect today. We realize that mutations occur during the development of the organism, and that those mutations, if beneficial, will become the new standard for that species. But it is not a matter of if I am to work out and get absolutely huge and buff like Arnold or something like that. My child isn't going to be huge and buff with big muscles. My child's going to be exactly how I would have been if I didn't work out. So your current changes that you do to your body are not passed down to your child. If that was so, smokers' children would be in deep trouble. So another evolution theory that came up was that of Darwin. Now, Darwin was a little closer to what we currently believe today. So Darwin came up with the idea that in a population of individuals, there was huge variety between them. And through natural selection, the environment would only allow certain individuals to be fitter, because of their random mutations. These fitter individuals, these stronger individuals that were stronger due to their mutations, would then live longer and produce more offspring. And that's how their variation would become stronger and more prominent. And Darwin did this by traveling the world and specifically looking at finches and birds. He found that there were similarities between birds of different areas, yet those birds still thrived in their specific areas. and he concluded that they must have come from a common ancestor but diversified due to mutations to fill a niche in their ecosystem. Okay. He also ate one of every animal that he discovered. A little known fact about the guy. So if he found a new animal, he killed it and he ate it. Which you can take that as you will. So how Darwin created his theory was through many years of research, and specifically looking at how different organisms adapted to their specific area, to their niche. Okay, so he went to the Galapagos Islands in particular, which are many islands in a sort of close-ish area, but too far for organisms to move between them. And he noticed that they were all similar but different in certain ways. Okay, same but different, but still same. Okay, and basically, yeah, he did a lot of breeding experiments with pigeons, sort of like what Mendel did. But the issue was, and I've actually searched this, Mendel's work was not known to Darwin. Okay, he was very closed-minded apparently, and Mendel's work also wasn't published because he was in fact just a Catholic priest. Okay, he wasn't some scientist that did this for a living, and he was trying to make a journal out of it or a scientific paper out of it. This was just his findings. And it would have actually helped Darwin a lot with his theory, because Darwin didn't know about inheritance or how this variety came about in organisms. But if he had known about these units of inheritance from Gregor Mendel, it would have helped him. The scientific community also didn't believe in Darwin's work due to a lack of evidence. In actual fact, it was more like a cutthroat game back then of who was most popular and whose theories resonated most with the other people in the field. Okay, and Darwin's theories did not. He also had to then go against the Catholic Church, because at the time it was very based, the idea of where people came from was based on Catholicism, and now Darwin was saying, no, in fact we share common ancestors with apes. People were going, no, I don't think that's true. But as we know it today, he was on the right track. So it's important to also realize that there was another man called Alfred Wallace. He believed that if species existed in various forms, that only the suitable would survive, which is sort of right, but he lacked research. Okay, he lacked research evidence, and Darwin had more. Darwin also published his book first. So him and Alfred Wallace had pretty similar ideas. It's just Darwin published his first and got all the credits and fame for it. I think Darwin and Alfred Wallace actually exchanged letters and worked not together, but yeah, shared information with one another. So when it comes to speciation, it's usually when a species becomes separated by geographical factors, such as a new lake forming, or maybe a mountain range forming. Maybe a forest grows in between two species of deer or horses, let's say. Okay, anything that is going to split them apart. Okay, now these species are going to adapt, or these individuals now that are the same species are going to adapt to better suit their new environmental conditions. Okay, or some mutations might be more favorable in one group than the other, or those groups' mutations will be exclusive because they aren't mixing, because they are geographically separated. This will lead to speciation between the two groups. So yeah, as I said, those traits that we can talk about, we can also mention the alleles. Okay, so those alleles are going to be mutually exclusive. They would not have come in contact with one another, and therefore they would become more standard. The more advantageous alleles will become the standard for these populations, and slowly but surely will get more and more different until they are two separate species. So when it comes to what evidence we have that evolution was a thing and that Darwin was maybe correct and what we currently follow in the scientific community is correct, there isn't much, or it's not complete. Okay, and this is why it's still the theory of evolution. Some of the main evidence sources, though, that we can use are fossils. Now, fossils are organisms that have died in certain conditions that preserve their bodies. Okay, so some of these conditions are that there's limited oxygen, which prevents the decay and decomposition due to bacteria. Okay, poisonous gases can also do this. It kills off most of the living organisms around the animal or around the organism, and low temperatures and acidic environments. So if you have to go to some of the glaciers, okay, or the deserts even, where there's extremely high temperatures, or as I say, in the glaciers where it's extremely low temperatures, it is too low for the decomposition of the body or too high for bacteria to live there to decompose the body. So both are going to preserve the organism very well. Fossils can tell us about the structure of the organism as well as their diet, and if it's well enough preserved, it can even give us the DNA of the organism. This has been shown in a cave lion. It's kind of like a saber-toothed tiger sort of looking thing. They found a small little baby that was perfectly preserved, and they were able to extract its DNA, as well as mammoths. They have found mammoth carcasses with perfectly preserved DNA, and they are now trying to bring them back to life so that we can see what they look like. Think of that as you will. Again, quite ethical issues going on there, quite a lot of ethical issues going on there. And yeah, basically a fossil is when the harder parts are replaced with minerals. Okay, and that's going to fossilize the organism. You also get mold fossils. Mold fossils are when the organism gets covered and the soil around it sets, and then the organism decays inside and turns into nothing. Okay, but the mold is still around there. The area inside is still preserved and the shape of it is still preserved. The individuals in Mount Vesuvius would have been mold fossils. Okay, you can go see their bodies. Search Mount Vesuvius people and you'll see stone people. Now they're not stone. What happened was their bodies were covered in ash, they died, and then the ash set, but the body decomposed. Then scientists came along and poured concrete into those holes in the ground, and that's what set, and that's what we can see now as these statues. It's kind of creepy. So as I say, although fossils give us a lot of evidence about evolution because we can track them back many, many years in the past, there are very limited fossils. It is incredibly difficult to find the right conditions to preserve a fossil. A lot of them are destroyed by natural disasters or tectonic plates. Many of the early organisms had soft bodies. Okay, so you have to have strong, hard bones to fossilize. Something like a shark doesn't fossilize because it is made up of cartilage. It is only their jaw and their teeth that will fossilize. Everything else just deteriorates. And there's still many undiscovered fossils. It's not easy to find a fossil. Okay, it's quite a rare occurrence. So as I mentioned earlier, fossils allow us to gather information and evidence of how an organism might have changed over the years. Okay, so we can see which fossils might have been related to one another and how over many, many centuries these fossils have changed from one another. In some cases, animals barely change, such as sharks or crocodiles. Usually when we get a lot of these fossils as well at one point in time, so out of the rock layers in the earth, you will get a lot of fossils in one layer due to these mass extinctions. Okay, so what is a mass extinction? It is the permanent loss of all the members of a species. Okay, and well, that's extinction. So a mass extinction is obviously an extinction of many, many, many species at once. Okay, so your older species will be able to cope with the new conditions, and they can't cope with the new conditions, and that will lead them to compete with the newer species and therefore die out. So something like our ancestors, the Homo neanderthals, okay, they were the oldest species. They came before us, okay. Our species would have mutated and speciated and speciated away from the Neanderthals, and they couldn't compete with us. We were better, we were more evolved, and therefore they died out. Okay, now there are no Neanderthals on Earth anymore. Now the causes of extinction can be due to disease. It can be caused by a new predator that might have come into the scene, humans, as well as environmental changes. So changes in temperature fluctuations such as the Ice Age can lead to mass extinction of many, many species. Now there have also been many extinctions in the world, in the Earth's history. Okay, I think about 5 major extinctions. We are currently sitting in the 6th, and this one is caused by yours truly, mankind. But beforehand, we had the dinosaurs, and the dinosaurs also went extinct. We're not too sure, but the main theories that we have is that there was a giant meteor that would have hit the Earth. Now we know where this meteor crater is. It's somewhere in Mexico, I believe. That hit the Earth and caused global catastrophe. Okay, caused a blackening out of the sun for many years, as well as the impact would have wiped out majority of South America and North America at the time. Okay, and then theory 2 was that the ice would have melted and flooded majority of the world, which would have killed many species. Okay, the same thing is happening today. So when it comes to the glaciers melting, okay, we are returning back to a time where the sea levels were that high. Those glaciers haven't always been there. They came there during the Ice Age. Okay, the Ice Age was when water was being evaporated, as it usually does. It snows onto the surface of the Earth, so it leaves the ocean, and then it's so cold that it doesn't melt. That's what forms a glacier, and that dropped our water levels a couple thousand years ago. Now the glaciers are rising, or the glaciers are melting, and that water level is going to rise back up. So we used to have a lot less land than we currently do, and we're looking at going back to that amount of land too. Now we like to think of animals as the ones that do the evolving, but your microorganisms can also evolve. They can actually evolve a lot quicker than we can due to their asexual reproduction. And when a microorganism evolves, it's usually to the detriment of humans, as they can evolve to be antibiotic resistant. Okay, we use antibiotics to wipe out an infection before it can kill us. But if we overprescribe antibiotics, if we overuse antibiotics, if we don't use it correctly, if we don't finish the course that our doctor prescribes to us, it can lead to these antibiotics mutating randomly and then becoming resistant to the antibiotic. Okay, and then that antibiotic strain can spread and not be stopped. Okay, so that's why it's important to use antibiotics as a last resort, as well as use it to the full when your doctor prescribes it to you. Okay, so there are many species of living things on Earth. So we're going to have to try to classify them into groups. Okay, and when we classify them into groups, we're going to do it based on their similarities. And this is going to help us realize how these different groups are going to be related to one another, and then can help us analyze the biodiversity of a certain area. Okay, so the more species there are in a certain area, the more biodiverse it is. Okay, when we classify all these groups and all these individuals as well, it gives us a way for scientists all around the world to be able to communicate about the same organism. The word for a cow in one country, okay, let's say in Arabic is, I think, bagara, okay, but then in Afrikaans is koi. So you see, scientists from those two countries wouldn't know exactly how to communicate this, okay? But then if they are able to give the scientific name for a cow, I'm not even going to try remember what that is, then they would be able to communicate about the same individual and read about the same individual, okay? So classification helps us to recognize biodiversity and provides a universal language for scientists to use. Okay, so now how organisms are classified: by their similarities as well as their differences. This originated from a man called Linnaeus, who grouped plants in according to their structures. Okay. So Linnaeus created this system, this hierarchical system, okay, made up of 7 groups. He listed it into kingdom, phylum, class, order, family, genus, and species. Okay, the 7 groups. Within kingdom, he separated them into animals, plants, fungi, protists, and prokaryotes. Prokaryotes would later be divided into archaea bacteria as well as eubacteria. Okay. So the species is the smallest classification, and the members are very specific according to that group. Okay. Whereas kingdom is obviously a very broad term. Is it an animal? It could be multiple different types of animals. Okay. Where species is referring to one type of a certain individual, a certain genus, a certain species. Okay. So Linnaeus also came up with the binomial naming system, which means when we name something, it is based off of its genus as well as its species. Okay. So this is all made out of Latin. The genus will have a capital letter and usually be underlined or italicized, so slanted a bit. Further development in technology allowed us to add a layer above kingdom, which is now domains. Okay, domain is split into archaea, which are primitive bacteria, your bacteria, which are true bacteria, your cyanobacteria, which are your photosynthetic bacteria, as well as eukaryota. Eukaryota would be your animals, your plants, okay, as well as some of your multicellular organisms, or your unicellular organisms that might also have a true nucleus. Okay, so eukaryota are all organisms where their cells contain that nucleus and enclosed DNA. Okay, this little, I forget the word for it, is how we're going to remember the structure of classification. Is dear King Philip came over for good soup or good spaghetti. It's a terrible one, not very memorable in my mind, but I have yet to come up with a different one. So if you can remember this, you'll remember it's domain, kingdom, phylum, class, order, family, genus, species. Okay, 8 classifications. So again, as technology develops, in this case looking into the genetic realm of organisms, we now see that there are some organisms that might look very different from one another or very similar to one another, but have completely different or very similar genetics to one another. You see, so we no longer classify them mainly based on similarities or differences that we can see. We look at their genetics, and this can come to incredible trees and genetic trees. I will think about there's a website for this where you can go look at every species documented on Earth. 1 second, I'm going to pause and go look. I'm back. It is called OneZoom's Tree of Life. If you search that in Google, you can go look it up. It is going to be 2.2 million species of recognized organisms and how they are grouped together into their yeah, various groupings. One Zoom, if you want to go have a look at that. Okay, so my name is Cameron. This has been Genetics and Evolution, and I will see you next time.